Hi guys, it's Lysoul Breakdown. So, today we're gonna break down some explosions animation, mainly focusing on animating in perspective and animating smoke and explosions in perspective to be precise. So we've got some clips from Solitaire. So probably get a start from this one. This one shows quite well how the masses and everything goes in perspective and how we can observe all the different stages of the explosion. So the most important thing, is the build-up. So it starts with the smoke and a missile essentially going to the ground. Then we have our hit. So 1, 2, 3. The flash for 1 frame. Then we've got 2 frames of the initial shape plus the camera shake. Okay, no, I won't do a YouTube intro. It's not the time yet. So, and you already can notice that the shapes are volumetric. So you can see that we have the oval shape and all these shapes are going across the form. So it's very important to keep this like related to overall form, and you can see that even if it's blurred out, you can see that it has overall shape here and that it implies volume. So it implies volume, so every line here implies some kind of volume and they are positioned in a way so they imply a curve, and a curve applies around it spherical object. So if we just do like circle scene, it doesn't have volume yet, but if we do this one already, it has volume. And if we add more scenes on top of that, like this is smaller, this is bigger, this is like that, it already has the volume. And if we add on top of that, and again implies volume, then you see I've implied this shape, this shape, this shape. So if we add something like that, again we can add a form to imply the volume. So what is the direction of this shape? Okay, now I've had this implied form and it adds the direction to this shape. So it is rotated in that direction. So this is the angle. So if I draw this circle, we still don't know what part or which way it's facing. But if we add something like that or something like that, we know that it's facing the camera. And for example, if I add forms like that, it's facing away from the camera, and so on. So depending on the details you put on the form, you imply different volumes and the direction of the volume. So you can just do a couple of forms, a couple of lines on top, and that will actually change the direction of the form. It's quite obvious, but still very important. The same thing here. So we've got this perspective going on. So this is the perspective of our scene. The explosion is fairly far away in the scene, so we don't have a lot of distortions on the explosion itself. It has some kind of vanishing point at the top, but it doesn't affect it very much. That's why we can worry a bit less about it. So it still has this kind of direction, so it still has some kind of sense of perspective or vanishing point going up, and we notice that the form, so we are looking at the form from the downside, so we're seeing the downside plane on the explosion, and it's following the perspective, though not much. Then again, we increase the amount of forms and complexity, and you see it was fast, very fast on 2s, and here it slows down, and then it slows down even more, and then it slows down with every frame. So it's quite simple in terms of spacing, but it's very important to keep the spacing more or less consistent and to keep the slowdown. So this form, you see we implied it, and it goes here. This form, it kind of blooms like a flower and goes here. These forms at the bottom, they move up. Yay, explosion sector. Yeah, I remember this video. It's way more like convenient to break it into clips, because TV Paint gonna die if I try to add something longer than 200-300 frames. And again, implying form with these lines. So these lines again accentuate the curves and the direction of the form. So if you draw something like this or something like that, it doesn't have direction. But if you draw something like that, it follows some kind of spherical form. And if you add detailist on top, you can make the direction of the form even more apparent. So essentially he is using this to signify planes on the explosion. And again, see how it goes. So it sort of popcorns out with a slowdown. And the position of the shape, it's basically quite consistent. So they go a little bit lower on the overall form, and they expand. Again, slowing down. These are sucked into the explosion. And these are moving up still while slowing down. Then again, see how the yellow layer goes. So we start here, it moves again lower, and then it slides inwards. Gotta change the color. So we got this kind of thing. We start like that, then it moves lower and lower because the new form appears. But that's not the most interesting part. The most interesting part happens later. So we see the explosion and it goes, so the back part goes just spinning in that direction, moving, and with these forms slowly floating and rotating. So it goes and rotates in this direction. You see these forms going up like that, and they increase in size, which implies that they are going towards us. And these forms, they slide, rotate in this direction and decrease in size, which implies that they are going out of our side. And overall this is like a fairly elliptical shape, and we're following this shape throughout the animation. We can notice that every mass has a very specific direction, and it is animated quite well in terms of spacing. We'll look at that. Yeah, what's up, keyboard fetish guy? Do you want to ask something? So these masses appear from the explosion, and let's see how it moves. So they move down, a bit less apparent due to the camera shakes, but they slow down here, essentially. So 1, 2, 3, 4, slow down, because as the form is turning away from us, every change here, so like the distance here from here to here, as the distance from here to this part is equal, but as it is in perspective, we don't perceive it as equal. So this segment will be faster visually, and this segment will be slower because the form is turning away from us. So we have to keep that in mind. So animating something going from this to this is way slower than this segment, and again this is slower. So slow, fast, slow in terms of form. And it goes, and it goes, it rotates, 1, 2, going 1, 2, 1, 2. But this is not the main part. This is not the most interesting part still. So the most interesting part is this part. We will have the smoke. So it goes in perspective. Now let's take a look at the exact form. So we can simplify it in terms of size by placing some kind of circles or something around it and trying to judge the size. And with this stuff, it's fairly easy because it is a circle. So you see, we have this perspective grid, and we can find out what is the size so if the smoke is like this and it goes towards the camera, it will increase like this. And if we want to move it in a different spot, we can just plot vanishing point and see how it goes. And this is if the circle stays the same. As the smoke expands, we can make this difference even larger, but this gives you an idea. So if the smoke doesn't change size, if it moves from here to this place, it should become this big. And if it goes back to this place, we can again draw out. So it goes smaller and smaller. And you can actually plot, like plan the scene out. I'll just draw some of these guidelines to understand if the smoke or something doesn't change in size, how big does it get? And if you add some kind of expanding motion, increasing the volume of the smoke, it will get even bigger. So you must account for that. So let's just leave the grid here and look at the spheres in this explosion as we slowly move through the frames. Okay. So we've got this apparent circle. So you see how it goes in perspective towards us. This is probably the closest it gets here because it stops increasing in size. So let's draw a keyframe instead. Like 1, 2. So it goes in a curve. 3, still bigger. So this is the closest it gets to the camera. Let me change the color. And this is the furthest away it gets. Again, don't forget about the same thing. So this is, again, the same circle of rotation. So it gets slower here and slower on the way from the camera, and it's faster here. So this is the same principle. So the smoke rotates around the camera, and we can plan out exactly how big it should be. You see, it gives us a vanishing point on the horizon. Like if you plot the point here, draw out, and so on. So you can plan your scene, so get a grid going, plan how you're gonna do the explosion, so what direction the explosion is going to. Then again, it's better to study some kind of volumetric explosions. For example, this is explosion from Naramitsu Suzuki. Arifumi Imai is very good at explosions, and there are several other like very good animators that animate volumetric explosions and all that stuff. And again, if this is that big here, if we move it closer to the camera, how big does it get? This big. Again, how big does it get? And again, don't forget about overlapping forms, because it's bread and butter of adding volume to your effects and animations. And hey, we've got some perspective going on here. So we've made a quick little explosion, and it already looks way more dynamic than if you just draw like very flat, whatever the volume, everything is the same. Compared to this or this. And this is just like it's basic stuff. But Naramitsu Suzuki goes all the way out and adds the illusion of depth by rotating the explosion around the camera, rotating the smoke around the camera. So if you simplify it to bigger volumes, so it goes from this to this, then slows down here, and you see it goes all the way back again to even smaller. So you see he's essentially just following the perspective and this kind of arc, whatever. So it starts here in this point and here in this point and goes in perspective following this kind of arc, getting bigger slowing down, getting back. And again, you can quickly plan it out and it will like make your life way easier. It's probably a good idea to like plan several keyframes for such a complex effect because it would be very hard to eyeball everything here. Too many forms going on, too much complex motion. And yeah, this is like the basis of it. And to make it interesting and looking like smoke, you have to add some motion on top. So usually the smoke is twisting and rotating. So you see here the smoke is twisting in that direction, and the forms from the downside part are going towards the up part. And then it kind of compresses inside a bit. So the bottom part slightly goes up and the top part compresses quite a lot. So this part is sucked faster than the lower part. And again here, the same principle. So it goes here and rotates a little bit on top of the rotation over the camera that we get overall. And again, it's not just one form rotating, so we get one form that goes closer to the camera first and then gets away from the camera, and relative to that form, then again this form goes closer to the camera, this form moves faster, this one moves slower, and so we create this balance. So get form that is very big but it's a bit further away from the camera, like the closest form to the camera, the second closest form, the third closest form. And we've got this staging, very good staging. So one, this is our foreground, this is our middle ground. This is essentially something between middle ground and background. And having these three elements move in space creates a very good sense of volume and a very nice satisfying animation. So let's look at that again. So damn good. So any questions, any clarifications at this point? If it's rapid, it's still the same principle, so you just plan it out, and so it's not a matter of the speed, it's a matter of how you stage your explosion and what kind of perspective are you using. So for example, like this is way faster, but the point is still the same. So it is in perspective. We can find out the vanishing point, find out the sizes of everything, so this is our perspective grid. I'm tired of doing lines, so if something is this big here, then over here it will be that big. Again, keeping it here, lowering the opacity so that we know what we needed. Again, we have a build up and we have a nice smoke going in perspective. So again, remember about this point. So the smoke gets bigger here. So it's essentially going out like this. Again, if you look closely, it is essentially having just a little bit different vanishing point, but the volume keeps like this. And it creates a little bit of illusion of depth. And again, overlapping shapes, like these shapes are in front, these shapes are smaller and therefore look a little bit further apart, a little bit in the back. These shapes are bigger, so you can imply volume and the distance from objects to camera with the amount of detail and the size of shapes. So if you use mostly big shapes, no matter if it's shadow shapes or light shapes, it will look closely. It will look like it's closer to the camera. If you use smaller shapes, like I can go like this, and this will instantly make it like seem way further away from the camera. And if I do it like this, keeping the perspective in mind, keeping this vanishing point in mind, then I can do giant smoke in perspective. Okay, so let's look at the explosion. So we have a build-up. It strikes through the building, slows down a bit. So fast start, slow down. Again, slow down with the flash. Then the rapid change of form. And again, still remembering about this vanishing point. You see, it applies everywhere. So it gets a bit bigger here. This form is closer to the camera, therefore bigger. These forms are overall are divided into smaller forms. Again, you see, we see that this part is closest to the camera because the way it is pointed, the way it is positioned, the size of it, and the perspective are aligned. And then again, remembered about all this perspective stuff. So we see that the most apparently in this part of the explosion. So we have, if this is like this here, how big does it get? Let's look. So it was like here. Then it goes this big. Let's look. Slows down, goes this big. Then this part going faster to the camera, then going a little bit to the side. And then when it gets to the camera and when this part starts building up, we get a very fast, and again, this goes in perspective, we see that, and that's why we feel that it goes like just in front of us. So like notice the difference in sizes of the forms and how it follows the perspective. And again here, starts like this, rotates, and again same principle applies. Goes to the camera following the perspective, and the same goes for everything here, for every part of the shot of the explosion. This part, this part. you see it rotates and twists in this direction, like 1, 2, here, 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 1, 2, 3, 4. And that adds on top of this motion to the camera and a nice rotation. And again, you see it doesn't go straight to the camera, it goes in a little arc. So 1, 2, 3, 4. How do we know that it's not going straight to the camera? Let's draw a vanishing point. So this is our horizon line, and this is first 2 frames. Can you see anything? I don't see anything, but it was here. Okay, yeah, now you see it. So if we draw a vanishing point, it should be going here, in this direction. But we see that it goes a little bit to the right more. So it should be here, and then it should be here, but it's not here, it's a little bit to the right. And that means that we're not moving right to the camera in a line, it means that we're moving in a curve. So again, it's about understanding the perspective and the way things move in perspective. Let's disable that thing and only leave the perspective grid. So this really makes it apparent how this thing works. Let's look a little bit more at the overall motion. So where does it start? Let's look at the motion of the individual smoke billows, smoke parts. So you see the parts in the back are less animated because it's a pain to animate everything as dynamic as the part going to the camera is animated. So they are mostly just moving in their respective directions, not much going on in terms of rotation and all that stuff. They are simply in between. However, this part on the left and the part going to the camera are very well animated, and you see that all the parts are going in perspective and rotating in perspective as well. So again, we get this bit, gotta use a different color, green one. So we get this bit, and it goes 1, 2, max size, and again, see, it starts getting smaller and rotating from the camera. So we get a nice rotation here. So you see 1, 2, 3, nice rotation from the camera. And then the same happens with a bigger bulk of smoke. Here, let's lower the opacity on the grid. Okay, still visible? Okay. So it starts here. Then it again starts rotating in this direction because we see that this black part gets visible and then gets closer to the camera. Then this is the biggest it gets, and then it starts slowly rotating from the camera and up. So we have this kind of overall pass, And besides this we have rotation and twist that goes like under the form, so it rotates in this direction and moves like this. So it's about layering movement, layering move. Gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And this works for all the forms in this explosion. Not this layer. Like you see, this form, even this brightest form, so it appears, it slows down here, and then it goes over the form and in the back. How did we know that it goes in the back? Because the size decreases. Same thing here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So every form here rotates, twists, and gets away from the camera. And again, this form overall again rotates, so it gets here, rotates even more. Same thing here. And on this one gets slower, rotates. Like 1, 2, 3. And if you can nail this twist and rotation, nail this slowdown, it will look very satisfying. And again, this part is going closer to the camera because the sizes of the shapes increase and again still keeping this twisting and turning motion. So it twists and go closer to the camera, and these parts go even closer to the camera faster. Oh, Takashi Hashimoto, yeah. Damn, Takashi is very good. Like top tier level good. Okay, let's continue to this cut. This cut from Takashi Hashimoto that you sent is quite good, but it doesn't use very much of perspective stuff going on, so it's very basic in terms of motion, and it's probably like 2 keyframes because there is no motion in smoke. It just moves to the side. There is no inside motion of the smoke. So it sells the motion or the shot mostly by having like interesting background layout and more or less interesting timing. In terms of actual smoke animation, it's very basic. It has very nice build-up though, and CG layering is quite good and compositing is too. But it's very basic in terms of actual explosion animation. So you can get away with many scenes if you stage it interestingly, and if you have like a very good build-up, because good build-up is more than half of what it takes to make an interesting explosion in sometimes, especially with stylized ones. So again, getting closer to the camera because the size of the object increases, and again it increases faster as it gets closer to the camera, and you can really see it here. So you can plan it out even with like simple shapes and circles. So you really see and feel the space like that. So we can even continue this movement and do like full on perspective move for this shape. But again, he doesn't just stop here, he combines this motion and the overall rotation of the form, so it stretches out and rotates towards the camera like this. Why do we know? Because this form slows down as it moves here, so it doesn't really change size that much here, but this form increases in size much faster. So when you've got two forms with different speeds that moves towards the camera, this creates an illusion of rotation. Maybe we can try something out. Just with simple circles. Imagine like a background. Is everything clear? Do you have any specific questions in mind? I mean, like, half of the problem is actually drawing forms and correct forms in perspective. Yeah. The Sum of Wars one is probably one of my favorites too. So again, the difference between the frames here should be smaller than the difference between the frames closer to the camera. And if we keep it linear, again it should follow these guidelines, but as I'm rotating it from the camera, and then it will slow down again as it goes away from the camera. Okay. Okay, it will be very hard and snappy. But yeah, get some motion in perspective. And we can get more extreme, to be fair. depending on what you call background Sakuga, I can do that and may not can do that. So I can do camera moves in perspective, like this kind of stuff. I don't know. I even painted some backgrounds in perspective. Okay, let me find it. Hell yeah. Like this kind of stuff. Where is that thing? Oh, it's commissions. Okay, so we've got a form going towards us in perspective. And we see a nice arc, a nice movement here. So what we can do now is we can add, for example, another form that will be here, and it will move slower here, but then as it goes close here, it will move faster than the form that we drew first. So it's here now, and then it becomes faster than the form here and goes in the foreground and stays here longer. And then it rotates around this form again and goes further away from us. Okay. And we can layer like many layers on top of that to create even more complex forms and movement. So you have to keep in mind the forms and shapes and their respective rotation positions. Yeah, I'm recording everything, so at least you can watch that after. After the stream, so it goes further. and then again slows down due to perspective foreshadowing. And let's watch the shit. And we did something very basic in terms of perspective moves, and if we keep layering on top of that and we'll add proper shapes to all that and proper forms, we can get an idea of the smoke rotating around the camera. And if we add a second shape here, for example, that starts very close to the camera, then this shape rotates faster, this shape gets closest to the camera here, see this shape gets closer, increases in size, and this shape decreases in size and goes from the camera. So I keep increasing this shape, keep decreasing this shape. This shape goes further away from us, so it started here, rotates here, goes further away from the camera, further away, further away. Let's suppose that it goes faster than. Let's suppose that somewhere around here we start seeing that there was a shape. This shape going from the camera. Again, it should decrease in size according to the perspective. And don't forget about rotation. Yeah, we can move it way faster, especially here. So this shape goes further away from the camera. This shape already disappeared. And you see you get a rotation essentially around the center, and because we have two masses, we have a relative rotation, so the rotation of both these masses around some kind of center. center of rotation for both masses. And if we add something like the third mass, it will click even more, like a medium mass here that also rotates in perspective and moves. Probably would be a better idea to animate it on a separate layer. Okay. After this frame. Nah. Boring. Still boring. Too boring. Can I draw these frames? Otherwise it's too boring. Test, test. Yeah, testing the test. So yeah, we created an illusion of perspective with circles. And we can do it all day, layer in one layer on top of another, but overall it's just about getting the structure right and getting this the size difference and the direction right, and of course getting like additional motion on top of that is very nice. And from there on we can build like full-on smoke animation. Even though animated it like that would be a pain in the ass due to the amount of detail and stuff. This mask going further away from us in perspective. This mask rotating and going further away. So you see it rotates. It rotates, it attacks, it expands. Yeah, of course. I mean, imagine if the circles weren't for smoke but for the character head. So you'd have to keep the same principle but apply it to character going uh, to the camera or of the camera in perspective. Like the circles and the principles of like the objects increasing in size or like going closer, faster, and going further away from the camera slower, the same anywhere. It's just basics. So this could easily be heads of characters and swamp of characters going to the camera. This guy is going to the camera. Then he rotates around. So yeah, you can easily apply it to anything. So like you can animate cars like that, animate people like that. Maybe it's a horse coming towards the camera, or a bird, or anything. Okay, let's look how it goes. Okay, not that bad. Not especially good, but it kind of works. Damn. Yeah, because it's not an explosion, we're just animating smoke coming closer and further away from the camera. That's why it's kind of understandable. It's not like smoke is coming to you every time you go from home. So, like, we can animate exactly like an explosion perspective in the same way. Now this farm is going further away from the camera, rotating. This farm goes in front. 2, not needed. Okay. Ah, we've lost some forms. Too fast. Yeah, a little bit iffy at the end, but still, okay. So this is a rotation in perspective for more complex scenes, and we can use the same principles that we used for rotation, essentially to animate anything. Let's say that this is oh, as it is storm, it's a love storm. Okay, let's break down the next reference, and then we will animate or not, it depends. Okay, next reference. So again, keeping that perspective in mind, we'll look. So again, this is a background and there is no apparent perspective here, but we can see the horizon line, and the vanishing point is probably somewhere over there, so the center, so we can imply perspective here. So have some kind of perspective there, and again, so it starts quite simple, the smoke just swirling around, we've got an explosion here, very fast one, again, it's very solid in terms of form, and that's why, despite that it's fast, it works quite well. Let's play that from start. So you see it disappears, only leaving the top part of the explosion masses and the trail going in the opposite direction of the movement. The masses of the explosion are very solid again, implying this change of volume by adding details and by varying the shapes, the sizes of the shapes. So again, shape size, smaller, bigger, smaller, closer, further away from us. Very solid in terms of shape design. Adding some details, mostly to signify the direction and to make it more interesting. But again, all the details are added to the volume and they make the volume and the form more three-dimensional. So it's a matter of how you arrange it. Oh god, damn Janta. Wish your iPad the fastest recovery possible. So even if we do something like that, it still feels dimensional because we use various sizes for the shapes and we imply that volume. And by implying that volume, we make it look 3D. So again, implying that volume, that direction of the shapes. Okay, see ya Jan. If it charges fast, hope you can join us. So again, you see, varying the sizes of the shapes, we can build very different explosions and like mimic the perspective. So if I add a bigger shape here, a shape bigger than this shape, for example, it will look very close to the camera, and we can experiment with that and maybe make yeah, we're learning about explosions and animating in perspective. So understanding the volumes, how that works, and how to animate these volumes in perspective. So like this method with circles and like with plotting the sizes and the change of sizes is very handy if you do something like not even explosions and not even effects but characters as well in perspective, getting the sizes right. So yeah, and we are learning about the volumes and the specific types of like designs of explosions as well. So something like that in perspective, this looks volumetric. So if we, for example, consider this, so this is the size of this smoke in perspective here. If we bring this form all the way here, we'll get this size. So for example, I can draw over this explosion and make it way bigger and keep it in the same perspective. Okay, see. It's more gray, I guess. Yeah. Again, hinting at that perspective. So you see, so we tricked our brain into thinking that it's getting closer by making the sizes of the forms bigger and keeping that direction. Okay, so continue to the animation part. So this explosion is quite good. We can see how it goes. So it's one frame with a smaller size of explosion. 1, 2, 3. So this kind of part. Then 1, 2. It explodes in this direction. See the forms going and rotating around it. And you see this kind of almost cubical shapes. They rotate in the opposite direction. And we get shadows instead of these bright spots. See, so this whole mass, essentially it's like a cube rotating. So it rotates. And the smaller masses, they rotate with it. So it was like this. And then it goes like this, if you want to think about it. Then the masses keep rotating and decreasing in size. So again, it was like this, essentially this type of cube, and then you see it rotates like this essentially, and even more. Again, the sizes change, it gets smaller and they rotate with a little bit different speed. And that's why it looks more interesting. So by varying the speed and the shapes, you can make your animations way more interesting in terms of design. And let's look at the frames again. 1, 2, slow down. Essentially, the form slows down almost at the same place. Okay, bye bye animation noob. Then we get the disappearance, and it keeps slightly rotating and disappearing. So you gotta get this slowdown right and this twisting, rotating motion. Okay, now up to the fun part. So the fun part is this hand going to the camera. Let's look at the motion of the smoke here and the sizes of the shapes. It has a little bit of motion blur it seems, so it will be a little bit unclear on some frames, but the masses are clear probably. So again, you asked about animating characters, and here's the best example. So you see his hand is moving in perspective, and we establish this perspective, and that when it goes towards the camera it gets faster. So let's add something to track this. So it gets 1, 2, okay, probably better to draw it as separate frames. Okay, 1, 2, so it gets faster because the motion gets faster and because it moves towards the camera. And you see the angle of the ellipse and the difference between the end of it essentially. So let's simplify it and look at it again. Same principle. We're keeping perspective in mind, knowing that when it gets closer to the camera, the difference gets more extreme. It's so little. So if we draw a bunch of these, so you see, that's kind of how we can plan the movement. So you can just draw the layouts. Solitaire is very good, especially in terms of animation. There are a lot of Nakamura scenes that are outstanding. So you see, we can plan a scene like this, plan out the keys, and you can properly animate it in perspective that way. So keeping the motion correct and keeping the perspective right. Yeah. Nakamura's cuts in Solitaire are wonders. Okay, now let's look at the smoke. So again, same principle. It's just the smoke going towards the camera, off from the camera, and all these circles. So 1, 2, gets bigger, even bigger, and then it stops because the motion and the smoke from the hand goes faster and displaces this. So again, but it has the same thing going on here in terms of sizes. So keeping these principles that we made here, and for the other parts, it's the same. So going away from the camera and rotating, then going closer to the camera here. Let's look at that one, for example. Moving, fucking camera shakes. Slower here, then it increases in size. So it goes like this. Yeah, and like very noticeable here. So it goes, this goes towards the camera, increasing in size. Then goes from the camera. And this again starts here, from the bottom of the screen, go into this camera, go into the camera, rotating inwards, getting bigger, and now it's rotating off the camera. 1, 2, 3, 4, rotation inside, and it keeps rotating in that direction. And again, look at these forms. So they get bigger as they get closer to the camera. We have a clear hierarchy of forms and shapes to signify that these shapes are way bigger than these shapes because they're closer to the camera. And again, essentially this is a circle with details. And it gets bigger and it follows the perspective. And that's it. And like you can notice the same thing in the smoke in general. So you see that it was planned out on a perspective grid because it almost matches it perfectly. And like this shit, you can't make up this. And this gives us like an illusion of depth, even though it is like 2D picture, no volume attached. And in terms of planning, it's nice that we have like this gray smoke coming first, then it slows down, then we get debris, and then we get black smoke, and then the black smoke becomes faster. So we have like a hierarchy in movement. So we get gray smoke first, trees falling down and all that stuff. Then we have like debris, and then after the debris we have like black dust kicking up. So it's nice. It's nice in terms of planning. Okay. So this one. In this one, it doesn't really follow the perspective. So you see that the building is in 3-point perspective. So it's essentially something like this, or it should be at least something like this. So everything converges at the top. That's why we'll have a huge distortion on the characters and all the backgrounds and all the effects. As you can see, the character is not in perspective. You see the character doesn't have perspective distortion as much as the background. And the same for effects. So this effect, it is very good in terms of shape design, and it's very properly animated, but it's not in perspective. So it's a profile view of explosion essentially, while in reality it should be like as viewing the explosion from the ground, almost looking high up. But we can break down this in terms of explosion animation. So again, we had this giant build up with all red stripes and whatever this red energy stuff is. Then we have like 1 frame, 3 frames, 1 frame repeated over 3 on 3s, then a flash, and then after the flash immediately we get the explosion. So you see how it goes. So it slows down in terms of speed compared to this, so a huge difference. Then it slows down even more. But again, keeping that change of volumes and slow down. So again, it gets bigger, slows down, so slows down, and then it rotates up. So the mass itself goes up, as you can notice, but it doesn't go straight up, just it rotates again in this direction, in the opposite direction, while going up. So while the mass in its entirety is going up, the masses in this explosion are rotating like down. So this gets rotated faster, and then the form at the top follows. And then the additional colors like add the volume and more interesting additional shapes to the smoke. So again, fast acceleration towards the camera, slow down, then the form starts going up, so it goes like 1, 2, slow down, then starts kicking up, so it starts kicking up, and so on, and it might fly up in reality. In anime, they usually slow down the movement here again. And it keeps rotating. Like, notice the shapes here that go 1, 2, 3. So starting slower because perspective and following the form. And you see how it rotates. you see this curve. And the same happens with additional layers. Slow down. And that is the same for everything here. There are legends about phones, like old 2000 phones that can hold the charge for weeks. I heard these legends. Again, you see how it rotates inwards. So it rotates here and then goes under the phone. And to make it more interesting, we keep like, so one explosion, slow down, then we build up the next explosion, build up, accelerate it, slowing down. So you see, start by accelerating it slightly, accelerate it quite a lot, slowing down. And again, when it's accelerating, it usually moves more straight without like rotations and all that stuff. But when it starts to slow down, the smoke starts swirling, rotating, and all that stuff. So it's very important to remember that. Again, go straight up, so building up the next explosion. So again, it's like a triad. So first explosion, second explosion, third explosion. So going straight, and then it starts swirling and all that stuff. And so we have a nice contrast in terms of sizes. The big boy, the middle boy, the small boy. Are a good, nice composition. Yeah, and again, a little bit different directions to mix things up, because if everything in your smoke is going in the same direction, at the same speed, at the same time, it will probably look boring. Or at least much more boring than it could be. So it's nice to have some variety. So if you have some shapes that are rotating in this direction, or some shapes that are rotating clockwise, it's better to have some shapes that are rotating counterclockwise or at a slightly different angle to mix things up. Because if you keep the same motion for every part of your smoke animation, if it's long on screen, it will probably look too artificial. Like smoke is pretty chaotic. However, it's a little bit different with very, very big explosions, like very slow explosions. You can get away with more stuff there. But it's still more interesting if you have variety. Like here, especially at the beginning. So I guess questions and reference proposals time. I don't know. And yeah, you can try drawing like explosions in perspective or smoke in perspective, and I can do a quick critiques. Oh, yeah. And drawers, yeah. Damn, like the scene. Takashi Hashimoto scene. Nice scene. Yeah. Here it's quite simple. So I mean it's hard but simple. In terms of motion, the first part is pretty straightforward. It's a huge explosion going, or rather like strike. Let's use orange because I like orange. So it starts like this, very good shape language. A little bit of variety, so it's not symmetrical. And it's still not symmetrical. And I see how he's working with contours and details. And it goes almost at the same speed, like the same spacing all the time. But it's very solid in terms of form. And it's a nice shockwave going towards the camera. Shockwave moving in perspective. And when it reaches the edge of the screen, we'll get a camera shake. So it is just a nice design and a nice layout. So as you can see, the smoke just gets bigger and more detailed with more forms. But the spacing is very consistent and almost the same. What sells it is the camera shake, nice addition of debris, and a good timing and spacing. And slows down at the end. Then we have a second shockwave, debris going to the camera, and then we get to like the best parts of the scene, which are the destruction animations. These are very good. Like all this that sells this explosion here is essentially the animation of the destruction afterwards. Again, yeah, 500 frames and my TV Paint is killed. If it's not night, maybe quick nap is a good solution. If it's night, quick nap is a bad solution. You'll mess your sleep schedule even more. Okay, okay. So, so, so. Does everyone want anything else? Okay, we can just sketch explosions in perspective or smoke in perspective. Let's define a point, a vanishing point. Canada Dragon effects. Hmm. Seems like a topic for the next stream. Yeah, Canada Dragon would be nice to look at and to break down. There are many interesting animations with Canada Dragons, Canada, whatever the pronunciation is. Um, yeah, if you want, you can animate alone. I'm just sketching an explosion at the moment. Maybe it will become like a proper layout and we can animate based on top of that. Yeah, Premier be mad. Like the only anime that has Canada Dragon for like 10 minutes, 20 minutes? I don't know. Hmm. What kind of effect you're trying to create? Oh, Canada Dragon? I'd guess that, yeah, keeping the form of a dragon actually for a longer period of time and like working with perspective would help this cat a lot because uh, you move him like it looks like you're trying to move him in perspective, Chaz, but it doesn't. Like the parts of the dragon aren't different enough to make them, yeah, like what we discussed today. You can just through some perspective grids on and see that your dragon doesn't uh, like match the difference. Like if I put the dot here, if the dragon is here and if the dragon is here, the size difference will be much more noticeable. I like the painterly style a lot, Janta. It looks very fun. Oh, elemental magic is great. Yeah, pretty nice Dragon's Julagra. Maybe just, I don't know, how about adding like a little bit of curves to the movement, because at the moment dragons are lifting their heads like in perfect line, perfectly vertical.
Hello.
Hello! How you doing,
I
Reddy?
I'm doing all right. I gotta finish this shot before I go to sleep.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I've got the gotta how many? Got After I finish this, I'll have 6 more shots to do for bones, and then the rest is all second key.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea is to slowly reduce the amount of freelance work I have for a while.
Oh, yeah, and take a rest. At least a bit.
Some rest, but also maybe work on some projects or portfolio stuff, or
Mm-hmm.
uh, like one thing I plan on doing is I got a hard drive recently.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna I've already started moving some files off of this computer just because it was getting pretty full. So I managed to already move 200 gigabytes of files,
Whoa, yeah.
and and then I'm probably gonna empty out my other laptop, and because it's an old Windows computer and it's just really slow, and the software on it isn't particularly interesting, but there are some nice books and stuff I found there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, oh, that reminds me, do you guys have the Richard Williams um, videos?
Mm, it depends on which you're talking about. I personally don't have them, I guess.
Um, because I have them on my computer and I could probably send you guys like a temporary link.
Yeah, that would be great.
1 second.
Okay, guys, gotta wrap up the stream. See you all.